So, guys, give it up for Scott. So, my talk is web development, novice to ninja. So basically what I wanted to do is go over all the skills of web developers. So for web development position, what they really want you to know. I've gone through like a lot of interviews for web developers or web development positions, and these are a lot of the questions that they'll ask about. So the three basic skills are going to be HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. For HTML, it used to be HTML4. That's come out and has some cool features that makes it really easy to do certain things. And then knowing some browser quirks. Now, some frameworks like Java or jQuery kind of take care of these browser quirks. Like Microsoft Internet Explorer will do stuff different than Firefox or Google Chrome. CSS, you'll really want to know CSS too. That's the main CSS you'll be working with. Basic styles. In CSS3, it adds special styles so that you can do kind of some programmatic styling changes, and I'll go over that in my presentation. But CSS resets, so basically some browsers give your web pages default styles, like they may add some padding to the top or to the sides of your page. What these CSS resets do is it goes through all the styles and zeroes everything out so that every page is going to be treated the same. And then your styles will be applied over that. And then CSS frameworks, Bootstrap and Foundation, and then we'll talk about Bootstrap. And then for JavaScript, pure JavaScript is what you want to know down pat. Some of these other languages may cut down on lines of code you have to write in JavaScript, but the core fundamentals you'll need to know. And then a couple of these other ones are MVC frameworks. I think Dave Malin talked a little bit about those in some of the CS50 lectures. Okay, so here's the different versions of HTML. So HTML4 is what you want to know down pat with. It's all the main elements you'll be working with. In HTML4, the tags were mostly meant for formatting. So a paragraph would have, if you put a p tag in, which is like open angle brace, p close brace, it would put some space in between before and after that tag, and then you would put text in there. Divs are basically empty containers where you would put a lot of your HTML, and then you would be able to style stuff that's inside that div. So like, let's say you put a lot of stuff in the header of your page, you would say div, and the ID of that div would be header or something, and all the content would be in there. And then you could apply a style to the div, and then all its content would have that style applied to it. And then an anti-pattern, what a lot of websites were doing, instead of applying styles, they would put the whole page inside a table. And you'll see that a table is basically rows and cells, and they would just put elements inside those rows and cells, so it would keep them positioned right, but it, by having these special, before the tags didn't have any meaning, but these new tags have special meaning. So like an aside, that's stuff you would put in like a sidebar. It's tangentially related to the content on the page. An article, so this would be, an example would be a blog post. So it's kind of independent content by itself, but you could have multiple articles on a page, which would be like different blog posts. And then the div, you still have the div, but it's used mainly for programmatic uses. So basically so that you can grab the div and apply styles to it, or move the div, or basically just logically separate the content. And here's your basic HTML skeleton. So you have your doc type up here, which basically, before it used to say what, I mean it still says it, but it says what HTML version you're using. If you just put doc type HTML, it assumes you're using the newest HTML standard. And then you have your head. Right here you'll put your title. You can have any CSS links to CSS files. Your script tags where you can put JavaScript inside there. Here's your body tag where all the content on your page is going to go. So your paragraphs, your divs, and all kinds of stuff. And sometimes you'll want to have a script tag down at the bottom where you'll do extra JavaScript that's going to manipulate these elements, the content on your page. But the reason it's at the bottom is because it will try to grab these contents and change them, but these all have to be loaded first. So your page will load from top to bottom. So once these elements are loaded on the page, that executes, then it can manipulate these things. Otherwise, if you were to put the script tag, you were to manipulate the DOM stuff up here, or you had this at the top of here before these elements were loaded, you wouldn't be able to do anything with them. Okay, here's your CSS version. CSS2, I said that's basically most of the styles you'll be working with. CSS3 has some special stuff for animations, programmatic styling. So an example I'll go over later is basically you have a table, and you have table rows inside that table. You can say table row odd, change the background color. So then you have like a striped table. You have these media queries are basically, it says, what browser am I using? Or how wide is my browser? And then it will you'll have different style sheets meant for different sizes of the browser. That's how these Bootstrap, these responsive frameworks work. It detects what the size of the page is. So if you were to shrink the page, it would detect that change, and then it would change the style sheet it loaded in. And here's what CSS frameworks kind of allow you to do. So if you were to just add a button element onto an HTML page, that top left one is what it would look like. If you give it a class, one of the classes that Bootstrap defines, like primary button, look what it does. It changes it to blue, it makes it all pretty. So basically all your elements you add to the page, you can just apply the styles that Bootstrap defines, and it will make them fit a certain theme. So that's what's really cool about the frameworks. Okay. For CSS, there are three main ways to add CSS to your page. The first one is inline. So basically I have a div here, and I say style equals, and then I have a bunch of styles in there. I have the width is 100, height is 50. I have a 1 pixel red border around that thing, so it basically looks like a big 100 by 50 rectangle. The second way to do it is to define the style. So I told you before where the head was at the top of the page, of every HTML page. And there you can have like a style element, and within there you can define the styles. So that would be on each page. In the head, you'd have the styles defined. And those are equivalent. And then the third way is in a separate file. So you have a separate .css file, and then in the head of your page, you would have a link, and it links to that style sheet. And it would be loaded from there. And that href, so that's a hyperlink, that would just be the URL where your CSS is located on your server, or in your file system. And
Preset 7, in order to pass the validator, it requires the separate style sheet.
Sorry?
For people as they're working on projects, PSET 7 requires you to have that separate style sheet.
Separate style sheet? Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That's a good practice. I'm glad they do that. And then I also note that it's better, so just like you said, it's better to have it in a separate file because that creates reusability. Because you can import this file from multiple files. You can just have this link tag instead of, if you had it in the head, you would have to copy this and put it on each page that you had. Or if you had inline styles, which are the worst, you have to go and copy the whole elements or have that everywhere. And then when you go to change stuff, it's a pain. Okay. Here's how we refer to, so how we define styles. You'll notice here, I just put the name of the element. If I want to reference an element, let's say, so here's a div with an ID of box and a class of round. So if I want to reference that in my CSS, if I want to reference that div, I can reference it by its ID. So for an ID, you put that number sign before it. So it would be like number sign box, and then and these will come in to play later when we do some JavaScript, when we try to graph these DOM. These are technically DOM elements for, I should have gone over that. When I say the DOM, I mean basically it is your file, or it is your, this nesting of tags. Okay, it's basically like a big tree, a big hierarchy. When you go and reference these things, it goes top to bottom and it tries to find those elements. And that's how those styles are applied. And there's by tag name, so you just say div. And usually you want to apply it to a class or an ID, because if you do div and you apply style to it, it does it to every div or every table or whatever you define by tagging it. This may be a little advanced, but CSS styles have a priority. So as I said, you can do stuff in the head of your document, you can do stuff in line, like on the element, define the styles, or you can define them in a separate file. Now, what if you have multiple styles, like you have a div styled in your external, you have a div styled in your head, and you have a div styled on the inline element. You have the same, one's red, one's green, one's blue. Which one takes precedence? So if it's loaded from an external file, you see there's these 4 numbers. These map to these, and number 1 is highest preference in the order they're applied. So the least important is the one from the external file. Then if you have special styles defined in the style element in the head, then those are applied. Then these styles are applied on the inline elements. So like right here where it says style equals, I would take more preference because it's closer to the element, it's more specific. I'm not saying you should do that. And then the most important thing is if you do this crazy thing and you do like exclamation important. So if you had 2 styles defined, so if you have 2 styles defined, and let's say you have 2 external files that both have something defined, a certain style. If one has that bang important, then that one's going to take preference. That overrides everything else. So even if you have like an external file that has a style defined, and then you have an inline element, the inline element should take preference. But if that external file has that bang important, then it's going to take preference over it. Oh yeah, and also specificity matters. So you can say, let's say you have a div with a table inside it. You can reference that table by saying, I want the table that's inside a div. Okay, that is the direct child of the div. The div contains that table. Or you can just reference it by table, or you can reference it by ID, or you can reference it by the class. Here's that element again. So my question is, what color will the table be given these styles, assuming they're all from the same source? So they're all from like an external file or something. So we have this where we say table that is a child of div. Maybe the background color is red. If it's a table, it's blue. If you reference it by the ID, then it's green. And if you reference it by class, then it would be yellow. So what color would the table be? Maybe I should do this other one that says, in which order will the precedence of the file styles be determined? So which one has the highest priority out of these 4? ID. And which one's that? Which number? Can you see it? Oh, sorry.
I guess.
This one?
Number 3.
Yeah, green.
Yeah. So that one would have the most preference. And then what's the next priority? These remaining 1, 2, and 4. Class, right. Okay. And which one out of these 2?
1.
One would have higher. Exactly. Yeah. Because it's more specific. So it's saying it's narrowing it down exactly. So the ultimate, the table would be Greek. Okay, JavaScript. So I like to refer to these three fundamentals, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, as like the noun, the verb, and the adjective. So HTML is kind of like the noun. It's the thing that just exists. It's the skeleton. The JavaScript it's a verb because it provides actions. So you might hear it referred to ECMAScript, and there's different versions of ECMAScript. That's basically, in order for JavaScript to be a certain standard, it's submitted to a standards body, and they say it's ECMAScript version 5 or 6 or whatever. It provides behavior and logic. Here are some frameworks: jQuery, MooTools. MooTools and jQuery are pretty much similar, but nobody uses MooTools anymore. Node.js, MVC frameworks. These are a couple MVC frameworks: Angular, Ember, Backbone. There's some more in addition to those. Okay, I'll get to talking about JavaScript and jQuery. Here are the ways you'll want to get. There's 2 ways to get jQuery on your page. So you can either download jQuery into like a folder and put it on your server, and then reference that, your server's version, or you can reference the actual source that is on like one of these, what are called CDNs, or content delivery networks. Basically, there's servers that are all over that have multiple copies of these things, of jQuery source. And it'll actually be faster to do it this way. And this is kind of weird, like how I don't have HTTP. Basically what this says is, try to use HTTPS, and if that doesn't work, use HTTP. It'll just use whichever. Oh, use whatever you're on. So whether you prefer HTTPS, something like on your phone and stuff, you may say, I have to use SSL, I have to use HTTPS. If you don't have that, then it'll just use HTTP. And this will actually speed up your download speeds. It's kind of advanced too. So when your page is going down your list of files that you need to import in the head of your document, it will load each one by one. It can only have 2 connections open to a specific server at a time. So like, let's say you have 4 resources you need to download. The first 2 will be downloaded. If the third one is on the same server, then it won't be able to connect it until one of those first 2 is finished. But if it's on a different server, it can perform that request. Like, it doesn't have to wait for those first 2 because it's going a different route. Yeah, and that works for, so all these resources need to be downloaded, like if you're referencing an external file. So you will for images, or if you're downloading JSON, or CSS or JavaScript files, or videos, or whatever. So for JavaScript, here's what I talked about. You query the DOM, you try to grab the elements out, and then you can manipulate them from there. So there's 3 basic queries. One is document.getElementById. So that's where you just pass in the ID of the element you want. So in that earlier example, like my table, you would just say getElementById, my table, you would have that element, and then you could do element.style.background color equals red or something. And it would change the color. Then you can do it by class name, you can do it by tag name. Okay, so here we have the table right here. Basically what I'm trying to do is do that example where we stripe the rows, where we change the background color of every odd element. So in pure JavaScript, wow, that is really hard to read.
Make the text larger?
That would be, okay. You don't have to like zoom in on this.
He doesn't like Max. He does not like Max. Come on.
Plus Windows Zoom. There's Windows Zoom. Here we go. Okay. So let's see. So basically, you kind of ignore this window unload thing. This is like, so I told you how you want to have your script tags at the bottom, like do your DOM manipulation at the bottom of your file, because all your elements will be loaded. You can do that, like if you had this in an external file and you were loading it in at the top of your document, you could do this window unload. Basically what this does is says, as soon as all my elements are loaded on my page, then do this. So it's kind of a hack to get that. But basically here, so I'm saying, get the table rows, so I'm saying document by get elements by class name, table row. And you can see where these TR elements are, these table rows, they're all the classic table row. I'm saying get elements by class name. It's going to get the table rows. So table rows is essentially an array of all those elements that have classic table rows, so an array of table rows. And then I'm iterating through these, so you look at this for loop, and I'm saying, start at the one at the second, because you know there is 0 index, they start at 0. I'm saying, get the second one, and then add 2 each iteration, so it'd be like 1, 3, 5, and I'm saying, here, to, so I get the ith element, say style, background color equals, you guys know color codes and stuff like that? Okay. So yeah, you can do FFOOOO, or you can just do FOO if it's the same repeating thing. So let's run this. Okay, and then that stripes each one of the rows. And then here's the jQuery version. So you'll see, this is the equivalent of that window.onload. You'll see this in jQuery a lot, which says document already. That's the same thing. It says like, when the DOM is finished loading, then do this. And here's where I do like that CSS3 sort of selector thing, where I say the elements with the class of table row, the odd ones of those, change the CSS, the background color to red. And then if I run that. Okay, and that was a lot shorter. That was a one-liner. And then there's also a third way to do it. So if I go back to this JavaScript example, if I I'm going to scroll down. Here's a CSS3, so you can define this style here. If I say the class of the table row, the odd one, make the background color red. That's a lot easier than other versions. Okay, and then also in JavaScript, what's going to happen all the time is you have events. So anytime anything happens, like user interaction, like clicking on an element, that's an event. That's a click event. There's scroll events and all kinds of different events that happen on your page all the time. So if you do this in pure JavaScript, here's what you pretty much have to do. So I'm getting the element with the ID of button, so basically I'm getting my button. And here I'm adding an event listener to it. And I say like on click, and then you call that function. You can ignore some of those other values, but so basically on this event, on this click event, do stuff. Now you have to do cross-browser stuff. I said IE and like Firefox and Chrome and stuff do stuff differently. IE, they used to have this thing called attach event instead of add event listener. So basically what this is doing is it's saying, does this property exist on this object? Does it have an add event listener method? If it doesn't have this attach event method. And you see they take like different arguments because Microsoft want to be different. And also on their events, they all have an on like attached to them. And now I'm going to show you the jQuery way to do it. Okay, so basically you have, I'm getting that ID. This is a jQuery selector, so we're using that same CSS selector syntax. So I'm saying get my button, and on a click event, do click stuff. And as I said, you want to make sure your DOM elements are loaded. So you want to make sure that the button's already loaded before you try to query it and do stuff with it. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to attach that click event to it. Also, I want to go over data validation. So David Malin talked about in one of his talks about data validation and different attacks, like SQL injection. So basically what you're doing is JavaScript, you'll be pulling the values out of like text fields or something and then sending it to the server. There's two ways to do validation. So there's client side. So that means that like you're doing it via JavaScript. You're grabbing the values out, maybe cleaning them up or something, and it can even tell you like before it sends it to the server, it can say, hey, I know that these aren't digits, or I know that this field is required or something, and it will just you can make it tell on that thing before it does the post to the server. But that's not really secure because they can manually send a bad request to the server. So client side is mainly for user experience. It's so that the user doesn't have to wait for stuff to happen. It can be like immediately know that something's wrong. It's more to help the user. It's not for security or anything. So server side validation is always required. You always have to cleanse. Once the data comes into the server, you have to make sure that everything's okay with it. You have to parse out special characters or any code they may have tried to inject. Here's some Ajax. Here's Ajax in pure JavaScript versus jQuery. So this is up here. This is my HTML. You can't see, it's different on my screen. There's some bars and stuff to separate this HTML from this JavaScript. These are separate files, so just do a logical bar there. But basically, on a click on one of these, so that first one's going to call is the pure JavaScript one, and it's going to call a send request. And what this send request does is it does this crazy XML HTTP request thing. So it creates a new XML HTTP request. There again, this is doing cross-browser stuff, where it has to like check whether you're an IE or Firefox or Chrome and what version you're using, because they have different properties, or they're set up differently. One's an ActiveX object, one's an XML HTTP request. And then after that, they will open a connection to, so figure that that's like a web service or something. Sending a GET request to a web service. You're sending it, and then it's got this ready state change event that basically says, ready state 4 means like it's pretty much done with the request. Status 200, you've probably seen like response request, if it's a 300 something, it's a redirect, if it's 400, it's forbidden or something. 200 is okay, and then if all that works out, then you handle success, do print, everything's good. So I kind of brushed over that because you guys will not be hand-rolling that at all. You'll be using the jQuery equivalent, which is basically $.ajax, and then you just have these parameters right here. So you have like a type that's a GET request or it's a POST request. You have a URL. You have a data type, so it would be JSON or XML or something like that, depending on what data type you're getting back. And then what you do on success and what you do on failure. So both of these should, so JavaScript version works, jQuery version works. I think it's in my talk. Sorry if that was like really, I had a lot of trouble. I wanted to make this really beginner, and I kept like saying, oh, I want to throw this in, I want to throw this in, and I kind of fell down the rabbit hole of stuff I wanted to shove in there.
That's good.
Everything I tried to talk about, like, oh, they need a background in this, and then they need a background in this, and some stuff's not really that difficult. It's just like getting used to working with this stuff. Do you guys have any specific questions? I'm trying to go through here and say that doesn't make sense. What's that?
How do you handle, like,
Oh yeah, I should have mentioned that. So that's what jQuery does for you. It does it behind the scenes. So you'll see like on this event handler stuff and pure JavaScript, it's saying if this. jQuery, when you attach this click event, it's saying it's internally doing all this stuff, saying like which version of whatever they're using. You don't have to check for whatever version they're in. jQuery is doing all that stuff for you. Yeah, so that's why jQuery is really cool.
How much of the front end work do you do?
So I don't do as much front end now. I'm mainly an iOS developer. I did web development for like 3 years, and I still really do like web development a lot. I like that you can just like you can go to a web page and you can just right click and you can open up a console, and they're probably using jQuery, so you can just like okay, they're not using jQuery, but you can just like I could grab like. And you can't see that either, but basically I could run like that CSS selector query, and I can say every text or every paragraph element on the page, make the font size huge or whatever, that makes stuff easier to read or change any of the styles.
Is that
And
Firebug?
this is for Chrome. It's called Chrome Inspector or something, or Chrome DevTools or something. I used to use Firefox a lot, and then Chrome's gotten like so much better. It's really fast. And you can like live debug your pages. You don't have to compile any code. Like you can just open up and execute JavaScript in the console on here, and it's doing it on your page. You can do it on other people's pages too. And this is kind of like for these queries, you'll notice that like document.get elements, like it has an S on it for those. And while ID only has element, and that's because, like I said, like ID, you know you're only going to get one back, so that return value, that is going to be that node or that object. So like a table row or a paragraph or a div, whatever you try to grab. This is going to be an array of those things, so you can like iterate over them. So even if there's only one of those things in like a class, like document.get elements by class name, that's always returning an array.
Are you using the CDN to get jQuery on your website?
Yeah, I usually do.
What happens if they change the version in your version?
So usually in the jQuery URL, so I think I have that in here. So basically it has a version set right there, like jQuery-1.11. The URL should not change. I say should not change. I've never had it change. You hope it doesn't change. But yeah, you'll definitely want to use that in your project.
What's Java server script?
Java what?
Server script? It's, an employer mentioned it last year.
Oh, okay. So, Chris Keegan's talk on like Node.js, it has like JavaScript running on a server. Basically, it's the language you're using to implement stuff on the server.
What resources would you suggest people who are doing research and trying to solve problems using JavaScript and CSS?
Yeah, great. Stack Overflow is awesome. Pretty much ask, like any Google results, you ask for anything technical, like the top like 100 results will be like Stack Overflow. But there are some good like bloggers too, I think. I used to go to like code.tutsplus.com, like a tutorial site where they used to have like a net.tutsplus, a mobile.tutsplus. Now they rolled it all into code.tutsplus, and it has like mobile development, web development, and there's some really good articles on there. And they have like a bunch of tutorial series. Like I did like this one day, it was like 30 days of jQuery or whatever, and like each day they would just show you something new on jQuery. Those courses I think are still out there. Yeah.
Mike mentioned Bootstrap. Were you going to talk about that, or is he?
Keegan's gonna talk about that. Yeah.
Just want to make sure he didn't.
Yeah, like in this talk, I could have just like talked about jQuery and just talked about Bootstrap and how easy it is. I didn't. If I talked about that, you guys wouldn't pay attention to any of the JavaScript or JavaScript or CSS stuff. And you will need to like debug certain things, and like there's little quirks of styles. Like maybe some Bootstrap style isn't working, and you have to override it or something like that. But yeah, a lot of the interview questions are about like these browser quirks and like at least some of the ones I went to. I mean, they're just kind of like basic style questions, like. And we can go into more CSS in a future lecture, but there's basically different things about positioning elements and changing sizes and what happens if in different scenarios. But it's a lot of these basics. Yeah.
You had less, and what is that?
Less?
To do with CSS?
Oh, less CSS?
Less.
So less is good question. I don't know if I talked about it in my talk. Were you just talking in general? You've heard of it before?
Yeah, and I thought I saw it in one of your slides.
Okay. So let me get this.
Just kind of in general, just
Yeah.
what it is.
Let me go to one. So basically, like here, where we're defining like styles like div, like you would define like a div style, and then maybe define like a div table style. And let's say you have like you want to define the table rows on that table. You'd like div table row. You would define these on each different lines. What less and there's Sass too. It's called like syntactically awesome style sheets. Basically, you can just like open bracket here, and then inside of that. Sorry, I'm bad at touching. Basically, you can open the bracket right there and put a table inside of that and have brackets inside there, and it does the nesting for you. You don't have to define these like on all these like separate lines. You can kind of like nest these styles inside each other, if that makes any sense.
So it kind of shortcuts.
Yeah, it's shortcuts, and it will like what will happen is you will have some like program on your machine that will basically decompile that stuff. It'll go through and it will separate the styles for you. But it's easier to read and like change styles when all that stuff is just in one like nested thing. And you can see the hierarchy of the styles instead of like looking for the div, table, table row, paragraph,
So
in a nesting.
I'm trying to kind of get a handle on that. Is that where it would be a CSS file and you would run it through a?
Yeah, so I think it's like, it would be like a .scss file, I think it's called. And then the program would run and what? Okay, yeah, this kind of bleeds into his talk, so.
Yeah, we've used actually both of them at work. So basically, you write in less or Sass, and you use their compiler, and their compiler will spit out JavaScript, the compiler will spit out just normal CSS, because the Sass or less just pretty much converts one for one. It just does some more advanced stuff, like it calculates stuff out or whatever. And it'll spit that out into just a CSS file that is what you would load up. So every time you make a change in less, it has to be updated in your compiled CSS. And just like, if you change your source code, that's basically what it is. It's adding a little bit of a programming language on top of CSS.
Yeah, I don't know. I thought you wanted
I have a
to.
question for Scott, real quick.
Sure.
I wonder if you could talk about this a little bit. what tools do you use on a daily basis, or would you use in web
When I
development?
was a web developer, so
Yeah.
HTML, CSS, I mean, everything I talked about here.
Okay,
The tools in addition, a good editor sometimes. What's really cool, I don't know if I can bring this up actually. Sublime text. We can really like shortcut this stuff. So I have this plugin that's called, I think it's called Emmet, E-M-M-E-T. And basically, you see this like where I have like, let's see, what was the zoom in?
Command plus.
Okay. See this big long, this is basically one long selector thing. So basically I'm saying, have it, and this will, like if I type this out and I hit, I think it's like Control E or something, it generates all this for me. So basically what it says is like, have a table. That table has a child, you see that arrow, the T-body, and that T-body has a table row with a class of table, tr.table, times 8. So I want 8 of those, and then each of those have an arrow key that says, each one has a TD, a table item, and each one has 2 table items. And then if I just like, if I do this and I press Control E.
Browser plugin?
No, this is an editor plugin. So if you're on Windows, Notepad++ has a good plugin for this. I forget what the name of that one was. Emmet might have taken over. But yeah, that's a huge time saver. I hate open bracket, close bracket. So, yeah, it takes so much time. Wasted keystrokes. Yeah,
What editors other than Xcode do you use at Async?
for iOS.
Yes,
for
iOS.
So we also have a Java project where we use Eclipse. For iOS, we use Xcode. There's certain things that you have to do in Xcode, but we also use AppCode, which is one of those JetBrains IDEs. Like you guys have PHP Storm. AppCode. The good thing that AppCode does is it lets you refactor. So like rename like stuff in all your files. You know, I want to change this variable and it changes it everywhere. Or I want to pull out a method or do all kinds of refactoring things, and that's better than AppCode. We're hoping, we actually, like some of our guys, I talked with some of the Apple guys, and they're like, you know, you may look forward to it in the next release of the editor, like this year. So we're hoping we don't have to we have to like switch between back and forth, and different developers on our team have different preferences, so it's like, we pair switch a lot, and we're like, oh, what are we using today? You know, like Xcode or AppCode or whatever. You guys want to get into Bootstrap now?
Yeah.
All right.
Nice, Scott, that was really awesome, man. That was really good.
Talking Bootstrap and stuff. So, LaunchCode TV, which is just tv.launchcode.us. The calendar.launchcode.us. And I'll show you the other thing that I wrote in it. These all use Bootstrap, and the new version of Bootstrap, Bootstrap 3, is awesome because it is written mobile first, it's written to be responsive. And what it allows me to do is it has built into it these things called media queries, which look at how big the screen is. So this is how responsive design gets done. So if I resize my browser, you see that? It changes the number of rows, and then if I go small enough, it actually reorganizes everything and hides the rest, hides that little thing over there. These are actually the list at the top and then the list that was at the side are actually two separate things that are shown or hidden based on how big your screen is or how big the browser is. Same thing goes for the schedule. If you resize the schedule down, the schedule does the same exact thing. And this is all provided for you inside of Bootstrap. And then I also, I wrote this little app in my free time called Terrible Choice. So it's basically a sort of giveaway system. And so I didn't have to think about anything I was writing really. And it gives me this awesome resizing. And then actually has a JavaScript thing that provides me with this drop-down menu for mobile users, which is really neat that I did not have to write that myself. So to show you what's going on, basically, we've got the container that holds all of our videos, and that actually resizes, but we don't care about that. What we care about are these things. These are the actual video items. And this is inside of Angular, so it does some weird stuff so that you don't have to write a whole bunch of HTML. You just say, hey, use this thing and do that other thing with it, and then it spits out a bunch of these divs with all of these classes on it. And it's these classes, which are some special Bootstrap classes that do those media queries, and it will resize inside of that based upon your screen size. And actually, the Bootstrap website is awesome. It gives you an overview of everything it can do, and it's actually built inside of Bootstrap, right? So they're showing off the columns and offsets and things. So when I resize, this whole thing actually resizes based upon how big the screen is. So if you want to get into the nitty-gritty of some of the awesome things that Bootstrap can do, I suggest you look at their documentation, because I'm not going to need that in the short time that I'm up here at all, ever. But it provides you with some basic stuff where you can say, all right, this is going to be an inactive column, this will be an active column, this is a success column, right? And you can apply the same thing to like your buttons. Success button, that's going to be a green button of some description, and you don't have to worry about anything. Yeah, we don't care what the CSS looks like. We just say it's a button default, or button success for the green one. Yeah. That's kind of big. So we just say it's a button success, and then we got a button. Whereas if we didn't have, let me inspect this and turn those classes off. Just like he was showing you, when you remove the classes, it just turns into this ugly little button. Nobody wants that. You can just add this to your site and it will look a lot better and be more consistent across all the browsers. So unless you are like a designer that really knows what you're doing, just throw Bootstrap in. It's probably a good idea. So another awesome thing is that Bootstrap is actually written in less. So if you're using less, you can actually use Bootstrap and not actually include all of Bootstrap. You can just say, you can basically reference it and say, hey, from Bootstrap, treat this item like you would your call XS12. And when it goes to generate that code, it'll know what you need, print that out, and then leave back all the other fluff that you weren't using out of Bootstrap. Using one of those languages, either less or Sass, because Bootstrap supports both actually, it's just primarily written in less. You should use one of those. So, unless there's something glaring that I missed.
Here, let me see. So you've got your default colors in Bootstrap, and you guys may want to go with a different color scheme for your website. And actually, when you download it, you can pick the color scheme that you would like. So if we go to Bootstrap, download. Bootstrap source. Examples. 2.0, this is really easy. I think they removed it in 3.0, I don't know
right bottom.
Nice. There's one here, though.
You wanna find them right now while we're.
Didn't the old one have a thing where you could like click, I want to use this font, or I want to use this?
Yeah, exactly, that's 2.0.
But don't use 2.0, because 2.0 is old and crappy compared to 3.0, because 3.0 supports all this awesome stuff for, you'll hear this term a lot probably, mobile first development, where from the beginning you support mobile, you don't add it on as an afterthought like they did with Bootstrap 2. Yeah.
Can you just pick your own colors if you know what your color scheme is?
If you're actually writing in less, you can actually specify what each color is. And like, Less has this really neat thing where like, the buttons, you see how when I, that's not a good example, but like this, I don't have buttons on my side. I don't have buttons anywhere, jeez. This window is going downhill. Alright, so when we hover over the button, see how it gets darker? Less has this really cool thing where like you specify a color and then you can specify like darker. And it just takes that color, whatever it was, and just makes it a little bit darker. So like you can actually go in, you specify, you know, I want my success color to be some weird shade of purple, right? And it'll just use that shade of purple, and then most places it'll actually just use like darker and lighter based upon that root color. So you can specify it out in less, which is also another reason to use less. More questions? Yeah, right up front.
Is there like a downside to having these crazy class names? Because I remember a long time ago in school I took an HTML class and they talked a lot about semantics, like semantic class names that make sense.
Yeah, alright, so that is the purpose of, like, when you use less, you can say, treat this, you know, treat a UL or an LI, treat a UL, right, with children, treat the LIs of this parent UL with the class, you know, say, calendar items, right? Like you would this thing. So that's how you kind of get the proper semantics in there. But out of the box, pretty much everything's a div, which is not the best design, but it works out of the box. That's the sort of trade-off you'll get. You have to do more work if you want it to be more semantic.
So if you know less, you can customize kind of how Bootstrap works.
Yeah. Yeah, you can customize how Bootstrap works, and you can customize how it works in the context of your application. Yeah. Back there?
Yeah, does it have presets for different mobile phones and tablets?
See, the idea is that the media queries and the way it's written will work on any mobile phone. It doesn't do anything to like detect what the phone is, it just works in any modern-ish browser. Oh, yeah, so you guys want to see some media queries real quick? Because I wrote some, I just copy-pasted them out of Bootstrap. Because why would you write your own when somebody else did it? So this is on LaunchCode TD. We don't need the H1s anymore, I should remove those. I'll come with that later. So that resizing that we did, and how we got the neat columns, which I just pushed to GitHub like 10 minutes ago, those are done by this, which is crazy looking. We've got at media, min width 768, max width 991, video item, nth child 2in plus 1, clear left. So it's easy for me to say, right? Yeah. So basically what this is doing is it's saying, all right, look at the media, look at what the browser is. If the browser is greater than or equal to 768 pixels wide, and less than 991 pixels wide, apply whatever's inside of this, right? So I could put anything in here. I could say div Display none. Important.
What does that do?
You shouldn't use important, but I'm doing it because I don't know how it'll interact with the reset. This is more specifically. Yeah. So, right? So that was LaunchCode TV. So if I load up my local version of this that I develop off of, that's fine. And then, oh, what? Now everything's gone because everything was a div because we didn't use semantic HTML. So that might be a lesson to you, use semantic HTML. But the idea is that this figures out, based on your actual screen size, based on the screen size for the browser. And it does all the hard work for you. You don't have to write JavaScript. You don't have to worry about how you access it in JavaScript because it's different in IE 6 versus 8 versus 9 versus 11 versus every other browser in the universe because IE is its own universe.
And if you did, you can differentiate, like if you were wondering whether it was an Android device or an Apple device, like that's in like a special header called like a user agent. So it will say like whether, like what kind of browser, like mobile browser it's using. Like for example, like for one project I had to do is we had this Flash thing, this Flash like slideshow that ran on our homepage. And if it was on like if you had an iPad and you were viewing it, or your iPhone, you wouldn't be able to see it. So we would either hide it or like remove it manually, like JavaScript would detect it or one of these media queries would detect it, and we would get rid of it. Because otherwise it would just be like a big like X or something like Flash didn't load.
Which is why you don't use Flash in your designs, guys. Don't use Flash. Yes.
The Bootstrap, what's it written? Is it CSS primarily?
Bootstrap is written in less. They compile it out to CSS for you to download and include in
There's no
places.
JavaScript involved.
There is a JavaScript library that they provide, but you don't have to use it. Like that drop-down menu I had where it resizes and stuff, that was using their JavaScript. That can't be done in pure CSS. But a lot of it can. All the display components are done in CSS. Anything that's interactive as far as the user doing something on your site and changing it is probably going to be their JavaScript library. Like, I mean, because you can do like hover and you can do different things all in CSS, but like if it's based on their clicking or something, that's probably the JavaScript.
Now, does Bootstrap have its own IDE?
No, you just use it in whatever IDE you use. Like,
And you're using it in PHP Storm?
yeah, like, so if I didn't have this here, right? I say call. I can just, it'll autocomplete for me because I have Bootstrap in my project.
Do a control click.
And then I can control click, I can decide which one of these I want because this is all media query stuff. So I want it here, oh, okay, it's minified, I can't find anything, forget that. It's a nice thought. But if this weren't all minified, it would act, and you were using their development version that isn't compressed like this, then you would actually be able to see like where these declarations come from and all the normal stuff you get out of PHP Storm or most IDEs, some better than others. So yeah, any editor, so long as it supports, you know, some CSS stuff, should support Bootstrap. More. Yeah.
Kind of a related question, but not specifically on this. I'm just curious, when would you use something like this to provide a mobile web experience versus building an iOS native app, for instance?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the idea is that, I mean, as a developer, you don't want to have to develop, you know, 5 applications, 4 applications, whatever. You don't want to have to develop a web application, a Java application for Android, a Cocoa application for iOS. and then a C# application for Windows Phone, and then something else just to add to the insult to injury, right? So, yeah, right, and then you have your API that everything else uses, right? So there's your 5 projects. You don't want to maintain all that, and with all the modern browsers and modern phone browsers and stuff, they support all sorts of stuff. You can store files locally, you can store a bunch of information, you can store all sorts of state and access it in normal JavaScript convention-y ways. And that, to some degree, removes the need for that, but if you want to go beyond that, and you want, first of all, if you want offline, right, you'll need to look into either writing something in PhoneGap, which gives you basically a browser, but that it compiles into an application, or you'll need to look into writing a native app. Also, obviously, the mobile phone's implementation of JavaScript, since it's running on a mobile phone, will probably be pretty slow. Whereas if you need something really performant, you're doing a lot of calculations on the client side, you may want a native app.
Cool.
Yep. More. Yep.
Not a question, but a more of a comment. The media queries, there's actually a way you can do a media query for the printed page.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. There are all sorts of awesome media queries you can do. Let me open my other project where I actually took Bootstrap and I stripped out a lot of stuff that I wasn't using. I left some stuff in just because. So I took this, and this is like tiny compared to what it was. So if you look, you can say @media print, and that'll so if you say visible print, this block will only show up when you're printing. So like if you have ads on your website or something, you could say, yeah, you can say, oh, what's an invisible print? Hidden print, there we go. So if you say hidden print on your ad block or whatever thing you don't want to show up when you print it, it won't. And that's all you have to do.
So you could define the hidden print on the object that you were putting it on your page?
Yeah, you could just add that as a class.